is soul leveling manhwa for devoid from emotion sociopaths? Well, let's find it out from today's video. Well, hello everyone and welcome to my channel, Expecto, Ridiculum. That's right.
If you want to skip the intro, go to 1 minute and 35 seconds.
In recent years, manhwa, also known as Korean graphic novels, have grown in popularity in Western countries alongside the growth of the online manga industry. I hadn't even heard of the term until a few years ago when I stumbled upon Miss Not So Sidekick and I completely fell in love with the style, colorful graphics, and beautifully designed characters. See more about this manhwa in my previous video, which I'll have linked in the description down below. So, one day, completely by coincidence, I discovered that my colleague at work likes mangas as much as I do. And after we exchanged a couple of titles, she said she's currently reading A Soul Leveling, a light novel published by Yen Press. And it really caught my attention as I was aware of the manhwa title that was based on this book, but because I'm not usually into the shonen and action genre, I hadn't read it at that point. So I decided to read the book, and she promised to check the manhwa out. I have since borrowed 6 books in the series and spent all my days and nights reading. I'm so tired, it was just totally worth it. I was so consumed by the story and the main protagonist that it felt to me as if the real world didn't exist. Do you also have a title that enchanted you in a similar way? Let me know in the comments down below. The novel begins similar to the manhwa. The world is protected from randomly appearing gates in towns and cities by men and women known as the hunters. If the gates are not cleared within a certain time frame, monsters pour out and mercilessly kill every living creature.
Gates? Like the thing that stops me from running out of the garden?
No. In this sense, a gate is a doorway to another world, a world with vicious monsters that are trying to steal all of your biscuits.
Not my biscuits.
That's why people need hunters. The hunters are ranked from S rank as the strongest to the E rank being the weakest. Our story's main protagonist, Sung Jin-woo, is the weakest E rank hunter that just couldn't be worse at his job. His financial situation is quite poor due to himself not being able to make much money from the dungeon raids and the fact that he must pay for his mother's hospital bills as well as his sister's school fees. Known as the weakest hunter by his colleagues, he goes on a seemingly easy raid into a gate, only to be faced with merciless monsters absolutely destroying his dungeon party. Surprisingly, thanks to the traumatic events, Sung's life is changed forever as he is granted the ability to raise above the mean by leveling up. So, even though Sung might be one of the weakest hunters to have ever lived, he clearly knows how to survive. This instinct gives him an advantage that many others might not have, and his bravery and kindness to others makes him a likable protagonist to read. Until
what?
Well, until you realize, as the story's plot goes, that Jinwoo's kindness was mostly a facade.
A facade? Didn't he save a member of his dungeon party?
But what else had he left? He was prepared to die anyways. In the past, as the weakest hunter, all he could do was rely on people's mercy and let him tug along into the gates. But now, as the most badass and strong character in the story, nobody's even close to be his equal. He's extremely overpowered, and as the story progresses, he becomes darker and more ripped of the emotions. And in my opinion, it's showing his psychotic side.
Going from the weakest hunter to basically a god of death in such a short amount of time would change any of you humans.
Well, I think Jinwoo is genuinely shocked at how much weaker the other hunters are compared to him. And as more characters in the story appear, they seem more like obstacles to him. All he wants to do is train in the dungeons all the time on his own. That's it. Feeling pity to Yoo Jin-ho, he accepts him as a team member who is tasked with carrying treasures discovered in the dungeon. Thanks to that, he can use the boy's wealth and family connections to advance the dungeons with only a 2-member squad. Want another example? After being betrayed by a team of hunters, he doesn't spare a single one of them and lets monsters devour their souls. He has seen injustice the world offered, and when he had the power to change it, he instead decided to be the judge and executioner. For instance, when he went to the gate with prisoners who were sometimes serving their sentences fighting in the dungeons. The officer in charge of them was bribed with 2 million won by a man whose child hung themselves due to suffering she went through because of the prisoners. After disposing of prisoners, the officer was going to report to the station that they were all killed by a horde of goblins. Unfortunately for him, members of the guild caught the officer in act. The officer tried to kill all witnesses but was stopped by Sung Jinwoo. During this fight, Jinwoo's skills were tested against a very strong opponent and his blood boiled with cruel excitement. He exceeded his limitations and killed the officer with cold blood. I emphasize with why he did it, but by no means it was Sung's role to play the executioner role. Was Jinwoo's decision right, or do you think he should have tried to contain the officer and drag him back before the justice? And finally, was the officer committing lesser evil by accepting bribes and killing prisoners serving sentence, or did he actually deserve to die? Let me know in the comments below, as I'm quite interested to find out your opinion about it. The story's author Chugong gave us a teary story about Jinwoo's past, poor financial situation and his dying mother, to show contrast between them and the cruel world. As the poorest and the weakest, constantly tramped on by the strong, he becomes the number one overpowered person and gets what he does. The same thing others did to him. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. His character doesn't evolve into a hero, he doesn't strive to be beyond the sick hunter ranking system. All he wants to do is mercilessly kill hordes of monsters again and again until the end of the world. And probably, as far as he's aware, people don't need to exist anymore. Want another example? Well before, a disaster hit the Jeju Island, making it completely uninhabitable. This was the biggest disaster in the history of Korea, as the S-rank gate have appeared there for the first time in the history of the world. At that time, Korea didn't have enough S-rank hunters to tackle the problem on its own. The Korean president had formed an alliance with China and paid a big price to borrow the S-rank hunters to free Jeju Island from monsters. Little did he know that China had its own plan to betray Korea and take the island for themselves. Korean president begged Jinwoo for help, but Jinwoo's mother only just recovered from eternal sleep, and he refused to leave her bedside. Even though his mother completely recovered and Korea didn't have enough S-rank hunters to retake Jeju Island. Even though they've joined the forces of China, the whole party was at heavy risk of failure. Not knowing about betrayal from Chinese side, Korean S-rank hunters have entered the Queen of Ants' den on their own. They have defeated the Queen and its minions, but her final scream brought an imminent disaster upon them. Monstrous ants killed S-rank healer and grievously wounded Chahejin hunter. Do you wonder where was Jinwoo at the time when this all happened? He was observing everything from the comfort of his home through the shadow embedded into the S-rank hunter squad. He exchanged his position with the shadow soldier just in time to save the Jeju Island party from being wiped out. Why now? Why couldn't he have helped them earlier? After defeating the ants, a terrifying leader of the ants reappeared and an intense battle began. Jinwoo fought with all his might, racing the time to save terribly wounded Chahejin's life. The battle was long and exhausting, and at the end of it, Chahejin was nearly dead. To everyone's surprise, Jinwoo decided to extract Shadow from dead body of the nation's hero, S-rank healer, to heal dying Chahejin. It takes some guts to do so, and a cold calculation of events. Upon failing twice to summon opposing soul of the healer, Jinwoo eventually succeeded his summon and healed dying Huntress. Thankfully, he had enough decency to return Ming Byung-ju back to the world of the dead, but if you read the novel, you know that he did it with regret, as the S-rank healer would have come handy. Why bother though, since Beru, the monstrous ant that he had defeated and extracted Shadow from, already consumed healer's strength and powers, and therefore had healing equal to S-rank healer. Perhaps it was the reason why he actually released the poor soul back to the underworld, not to mention that he possesses almost infinite supply of world-level healing potions. But all I've said, I enjoyed reading the series tremendously. Just the thought of putting myself in Jinwoo's shoes and becoming badass and mercilessly returning all the battle people gives me thrill. But if you already watched my Q&A video, you are probably aware that I am not a fan of superhero and heroism. What I enjoy is anti-heroes kicking ass and living for themselves as well as for their loved ones. Such characters don't mind committing questionable deeds to get the job done. They've been at the bottom and they have no intention of going back there. Jinwoo's intelligence and intuition is above average. He is a man that cares for the people close to him, but is also very aware of what he can do if he wishes to. And believe me, dark thoughts constantly cross his mind. What makes the story even more appealing is the fact that the RPG structure of the world is only accessible to him. Jinhwa has access to the secret system that gives him rewards as well as punishments for failing to accomplish certain quest goals. He has access to hidden equipment and stash, and he can make his weapons appear and disappear at will. He's also able to buy valuable potions from the store, as well as allocate experience points towards certain skills and attributes. The overpowered access to cheat codes thing is common in manga and manhwas, but it works especially well in the story. I was completely consumed by the first volume and finished it within a day because it is well written. The manhwa itself is absolutely packed with epic fights and detailed graphics. Reading it provides a multitude of eye candy with its stunning visuals. A note from myself: if you started reading the novel first and you've devoured the first few chapters, then you have probably been surprised by the description of the evil system god in the temple. How did you imagine it? Let me know in the comments below. Does Jinhwa have a love interest in the story? Well, I wouldn't want to give you too many spoilers if you haven't read it yet, but I'd like to say that the beginning of the relationship between Jinhwa and extremely skilled S-rank hunter Cha-hae is quite ridiculous. At first, Jinhwa doesn't think much of her, and Cha-hae's feeling is completely one-sided, but it does eventually change. She fell in love with him at first sight because Jinhwa was the first person that smelled nice to her. Weird, right? Jinhwa loves making fun of her, and she often completely loses her cool composure in front of him. If I was to describe the relationship at first, I'd see Cha-hae like this. And this is it for today's review. If you liked the video, please give me a like. And if you'd like to hear more from me, subscribe. Thank you very much for supporting my channel here on YouTube as well as on Instagram. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!